This is Gamecock Central's Game Day podcast. Emerson Phillips with Chris Clark and Wes Mitchell. Glad to have you along today. 7 o'clock kickoff tonight, and the game will be televised on ESPN2. Fellas, the Gamecocks coming off this win over NC State last weekend, and I think it was a game that turned out to be best-case scenario for the Gamecocks. They got solid contributions from all three phases, plus they got the win, and really no injuries coming out of this NC State game as well. So it looked like a best-case scenario for South Carolina last weekend, fellas.
Yeah, and I think, guys, that sort of the way the game came across and the fact that, they had to face a little bit of adversity along the way. I think the first half we saw a lot of the issues we thought might plague the defense sort of pop up. And then the second half, I thought we started to see some very real progress, as far as doing some of the things that we talked about this team needing to do if they're going to have a successful year. Particularly, Chris, I thought that the way they played defense in the second half on third and longs compared to the third and longs in the first half when they just were not able to get off the field was something I don't want to put too much into one half, but if they can continue to do that, then obviously that's going to help this team moving forward.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they came out in the second half, and I think really a key for them was that third quarter, where, as you pointed out, they were able to get after the passer a little bit more. They did force some third and long situations, and NC State did hit them on a couple downfield passes, but they came out, they got some sacks, they got some pressures. South Carolina had 4 sacks in the game. They got a sack on a 3-man pressure during the game, which we haven't seen in a while, I think, and had 11 tackles for loss. And probably both of those are a product of NC State running, 100 plays. But also, I think this defense just passed the eyeball test. They still have, a lot to work on, there's no doubt. But just in terms of how they played the run, rushed the passer, how they looked up front, some things that they did in the passing and running game in terms of defense, I think it was a better performance, even though it's not what they wanted in terms of, snap count. And I know, Wes, you explained that on some of our content on the site, how that happened, in terms of the points that they gave up, the yardage they gave up. They want to clean up a lot of that stuff. But overall, it was I think a better performance than they would have turned in last season. I think it showed progress.
Fellas, certainly areas for improvement for the Gamecocks, but you look at Deebo Samuel, SEC Special Teams Player of the Week, 16 tackles for sophomore linebacker T.J. Brunson. He leads Power 5 football in tackles through 1 week of the season. I really couldn't have asked for a much better start to the season for the Gamecocks.
Yeah, and, I went back and watched T.J. and sort of just focused on him. I didn't realize as the game went along how many tackles he was racking up, but then you go back and you watch what he did, and I don't know that necessarily we thought coming into the year that Brunson was ready to be that player we saw. But I think looking back, sort of the confidence the coaches have shown in T.J. Brunson this offseason, the confidence that his teammates have in him, this is a guy for South Carolina that I think in our coverage leading up to the season, we maybe have undervalued what T.J. Brunson could potentially be for this team. And I like the thing I like most about T.J. Brunson is what Will Muschamp said after, is that T.J. Brunson is harder on himself than even Muschamp is on T.J. Brunson. So I think this kid has a bright future in the program. You look at the linebacker spot and how that's a question mark, especially going into next year when you lose 2 seniors. And that's huge for this team, both this year and next year, that he can sort of step up and step into a bigger role. And I'm just happy for a local guy too. Anybody who's ever talked to or interviewed or been around T.J. Brunson, just a first-class kid. So you got to be happy for him. That was a big performance for him, obviously.
Yeah, Brunson, just a really good, as Muschamp said it, glad he's our Mike linebacker, just really, really active. And I'm with you, Wes. I thought this guy really liked him out of high school. Thought he was going to be a good football player, but, just in playing sort of sparingly last season, special teams and some backup snaps, didn't see the field a ton. And he really looks like he's a smart, intelligent player. He's always around the football, which is what you want out of your Mike linebacker. And he's a big physical guy. He looks bigger this season than he did last year. He's physically matured. And so for him to step up and be sort of a stalwart alongside Bryson Howard Williams and Sky Moore is huge. They still need to develop some depth behind those guys. But his emergence, I think, is really going to help this team if he can continue to be that consistent.
So a great start for the Gamecocks, winning as an underdog in this neutral site game last week in Charlotte over NC State. And, fellas, if there's been one negative topic that we've had this week, and it hasn't been anything major, but it's been something we can sort of laugh at this point, it was the commentary from Greg McElroy, the color analyst for ESPN, who seemed to side with NC State on a lot of the calls that seemed to be 50-50 in the ball game, plays that were subject to review. And Gamecock fans, I think, didn't appreciate the angle that McElroy was coming from. And that brings us to our first call of the day from the Gamecock Central Hotline. We have the Gamecock Central Hotline set up for you if you want to be a part of our podcast. You can call the hotline number. It's 803-497-9058. That number again, 803-497-9058. We do have some calls that we're going to get to today, and we're going to hear first from Royce, who was asking about Greg McElroy and some of his commentary during the game, the TV broadcast on Saturday.
Hey, guys, this is Royce. Thank you for taking my call. I just had a question about the commentary for Saturday's game. How much money do you think Greg McElroy had riding on that game? Thank you.
All right, so there you have it, fellas. Thanks for the phone call, Royce. A lot of Gamecock fans not pleased with Greg McElroy during the game. I think most folks like McElroy, fellas, but he definitely seemed to be wearing red glasses on Saturday.
Yeah, and you know what? I was going to say, I normally think he does a really good job, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist when it comes to, this guy doesn't like my team and stuff like that, but Royce and a lot of Gamecock fans do have a point. It seemed like even some kind of, 50-50, but where to me it looked pretty obvious, that probably goes South Carolina's way. Greg was having none of it, so I agree. I thought he was at the very least off his game on Saturday.
It was a little strange. And I'm with you, Wes. I think he does a good job and keeps it down the middle. He's had a lot of nice things to say about South Carolina. He's not a guy who's some noted hater of the Gamecocks. And I do think, look, these guys do get paid to not only just tell you what's happening in the game, but tell you about angles and storylines and give opinions. And sometimes that's just sort of part of the broadcast experience. I don't think it was as bad as y'all remember when South Carolina was playing UCLA in the College World Series, and the announce crew then was just completely unprepared for anything but UCLA to win both games 20-0. I don't think it was nearly on that level.
Yeah, that was Oral Hershiser, if memory serves, doing color during the College World Series back then. So just a bit befuddling that McElroy, the video that we were watching on the replays just didn't seem to back up his opinions for some of those questionable calls or 50-50 calls. So thanks for the phone call, Royce. Fellas, let's turn our attention now to Missouri. And, an interesting game for Missouri last Saturday. They rolled up 72 points in a win over Missouri State, an FCS opponent that went 4-7 last year. They were 2-6 in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. And it was kind of a middling FCS program. Missouri had its way all day offensively, a record-setting day for the Tigers, over 800 yards of offense and 520 yards passing for quarterback Drew Lock, including 7 touchdown passes. Missouri scored 10 TDs in this ball game against Missouri State, but defensively, Missouri State moved the ball up and down the field most of this ball game. In fact, Missouri State had the lead several times in the first half. Missouri State finished with 492 yards of offense, and they scored 35 points in the first half. Now, Missouri had 48 at halftime. It was 48-35. Missouri at halftime. So a record-setting day for their offense, offset by the fact that their defense really had problems against middle-of-the-road FCS team. And you got to believe Missouri very concerned about a much more potent Gamecock attack that comes into Columbia, Missouri today.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, it's very interesting because Missouri's first game this year offensively, when we talk about what they did on offense, last season they played, I believe it was Delaware State, and put up, 79 points on them. And our colleague at Power Mizzou, Gabe DeArmond, pointed out that was probably the worst football team he's ever seen at Faurot Field. After that, they were just sort of, had some up and downs offensively the rest of the season once they faced better competition. So will that be the case this year? I'm not sure, but What I do know is, man, that performance defensively the first week from Missouri, maybe it's a little bit of an outlier. Maybe that's their worst defensive performance of the year, but I think it's a bit alarming who the opponent was, not to take anything away from Missouri State, but my understanding is it's sort of a middle of the pack, FCS team. And Missouri looked really, really bad in a lot of different phases of the game. And I think that's something that you can't take everything away from just one football game, but I think you can sort of draw from that things may not be all that peachy on that side for Missouri. And Barry Odom's a good defensive coach. They are playing a lot of young guys, and I'm sure they'll get some things figured out, but it does look like an area in which South Carolina can take some advantage.
All I could think of watching that game on YouTube was basically that when Will Muschamp was watching that film, his eyes were probably bleeding. Like, a defensive guru watching that display of defense was just – I thought it was atrocious, and I thought the team speed mainly, watching Missouri's offense and how they looked, I thought part of that, not that Missouri's not really good on offense, I thought some of that was from the lack of team speed overall for Missouri State. They could not hang with Missouri's receivers either before the ball was thrown, after the ball was thrown, yards after catch, the deep passes as well. I thought the opponent played a big role in that. But then I watched Missouri's defense and they didn't look like an overall extremely fast unit either. So I'm kind of curious, guys, to see how South Carolina is going to match up against this Missouri squad. And it'll be difficult to defend them, no doubt. But this certainly, people have been talking about it all week. It's not some great, analysis or anything, but it certainly seems like a defense South Carolina should be able to score some points on.
Everybody's figuring this game is going to be a shootout, fellas. The total opened at 72. It's already up to 74 or 5, depending on where you look. And everybody likes the over in this ball game based on the fact that the Gamecock offense played well, particularly in the first half last week. And Missouri scored, they left their starters in. They weren't able to put Missouri State away until late in that ball game. So their starters played all but about the last 6 minutes last week against Missouri State. So everybody thinks this is going to be a shootout. And let's talk more about the Missouri offense here. Drew Lock, and they got a couple of wide receivers that are very talented. Jamon Moore, 1,000-yard receiver a year ago, had 4 catches for nearly 200 yards in this ball game, 2 touchdowns, long TDs for Moore, big plays throughout the ball game. And they've got a slot receiver named Jonathan Johnson, who is a smaller receiver. Moore is 6'3", about 205, and Johnson's 5'9". He'll line up in the slot, but a speedy slot receiver that could present some matchup problems for the Gamecocks. And, a depth at tight end as well for Missouri. They got 3 tight ends that they're going to play, and a really big offensive line that allowed running back Demarie Crockett ran for 202 yards in this ball game. So weapons all over the field for Drew Lock, and Missouri offense that was firing on all cylinders. 72 points last week in that win over Missouri State.
Yeah, Emerson, skill players everywhere. And I think with these high-profile, high-scoring offenses, you think of the passing game, but then you look at the Crockett kid and very, very good football player in his own right, especially with Missouri all spread out and teams having to account for the passing game. That gives him lots of opportunities in the running game to make plays. And, I think the second thing I notice about Missouri is all that skill talent we're talking about. The first thing you notice is just how fast they get to the line of scrimmage. Most of the time they are hurry up, no huddle. And if you watch, they're kind of only slowed down by the speed of the ref spotting the ball. Most of the time, as soon as the ref spots the ball and then he gets into position, they're snapping the football, and there's generally 29, 30 seconds left on the play clock. And it's almost robotic how they immediately at the end of a play get to the line of scrimmage and then just snap the football.
Yeah, and that causes your defense a lot of problems. The issue with Missouri is, they don't want to create a bunch of warp speed 3 and outs. Then that's putting their defense, which again does not look that great thus far with our 1 game sample that we have. That puts their defense in a really bad spot. That means they're not getting on the field, allowing South Carolina to possess the ball. But it is a difficult thing for defenses that they're playing against to defend because they are going so fast. You've got to really be focused. You got to get the defensive call in immediately, which probably means you've got to keep it more simple, to be frank, a lot of the time. You've also got to be focused. You got to know your assignment. Sometimes you may be in a complex coverage. And so you got to be able to think extremely quickly in the back end. Your big guys are going to get tired. They're not going to have a lot of time to go out there and pass rush and get to the quarterback. And whatever energy they're expending is sometimes wasted because they're getting the ball out pretty quick. And then they're pretty good at running the offense. They get the ball out into space to some talented receivers, and they can run it too with Crockett, as you mentioned, Emerson. So that makes it a really big challenge.
Fellas, we heard earlier this week from Gabe DeArmond from PowerMizzou.com, and he said that 2 stops a half for either team defensively could be enough to win this ball game. Will Muschamp said earlier in the week in his press conference that the Gamecocks want to run the football more. So talk about game plan this week, Wes, Chris. South Carolina looks to be able to exploit this Missouri defense. I think based on what we saw through 1 week, the Gamecocks have got to like their chances to move the football and score points against Missouri, but you got to feel like Missouri, after its big production offensively, feels the same way.
Yeah, and Chris, I'll let you hit on what you think the game plan might be, but I'm not so sure, guys, that we're going to necessarily have this track meet everyone's expecting. A lot of times it seems like when that's the expectation, it doesn't always go that way. Two stops per half, could win the game. I don't know. I don't think this is going to be an all-out Big 12 style matchup. I think this is still the SEC. Last year the game was 31-21 South Carolina. There was some scoring, don't get me wrong. There was a lot of ball movement from both teams, but it wasn't an absolute shootout. I think both offenses are improved from then, but still, I think we're going to see defensives have their say. We're going to see some punts. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe it is 42 to 45 or something like that, but I think this is a game where, again, and like I said, I'll let you hit it, Chris, but if South Carolina can run the football and possess the ball, then I don't think this is going to be a 40-something to 40-something football game.
Yeah, I think they would not want that, in fact. But, the 2 keys to victory for me, I would look at last year's game. Now, I'm not a huge fan of doing that because it's 2 different teams. But when we look at philosophically what South Carolina's going to do on defense, what Missouri's going to do on offense, vice versa, there are some differences. Sure, there's some personnel differences. But last season, it was a pretty close overall. It was a 10-point game in favor of South Carolina. And 2 statistics really jumped out to me. And one was that, South Carolina possessed the ball for 36 minutes to Missouri's 24. So they won that time of possession battle, limited Missouri's possessions to that extent. And on top of that, South Carolina also won the turnover battle. They created 3, and then they had 0 of their own. And so I think those 2 statistics are absolutely huge. And Will Muschamp's talked about, some of those things, especially turnover margin in terms of what it takes to go and win games. But those were huge last season, and I think it'll be pretty big this year too.
Fellas, this is the conference opener for both ball clubs, and obviously one team's going to leave this game 1-0 in league play, so the game is huge from that standpoint alone. But when I look at the fact that Jake Bentley is making just his 9th start, and he didn't win a road start last year, didn't get a lot of opportunities, played at Florida and at Clemson, but he has not won a game on the road yet. So you got to look at this game as an opportunity for him to allow his confidence to continue to grow. Talk about the importance of getting that first road win and what that could mean for the Gamecocks the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think it would be big for confidence. And look, even beyond just a road win and confidence, is I think when you look at this early slate for South Carolina, this is a very difficult schedule. The NC State opener was a difficult game, and they, fortunately for South Carolina, walked away with a win. That said, this early stretch in September with NC State at Missouri, Kentucky at home, that 3-game stretch to me does represent their best shot to notch 3 straight wins this season and to start it out well and to start working your way towards a good season, towards bowl eligibility, which is, always a goal of any football team, especially with where this program's at in its development. They just need to continue to progress. So, any win's a confidence builder, but I think more than that, just adding another win to the total and playing well and staying healthy would be huge.
All right, let's take our second call today from the Gamecock Central Hotline. We're going to hear from Tyler, who is a student at the University of South Carolina. He's got a question about Jake Bentley, and when we come back, I want to ask you fellas about the 2 quarterbacks in today's game, Jake Bentley for Carolina and Drew Lock for Missouri. But first, let's listen in to Tyler.
Hey, guys, this is Tyler. I'm a freshman at USC this fall. Where do you think that Jake Bentley will rank in terms of best SEC quarterbacks by the end of this season? Thanks.
All right, thanks for the phone call, Tyler. Fellas, what do you think? Where does Bentley rank among SEC quarterbacks this year?
I think, guys, he's in the conversation is sort of where I put it right now as far as the best in this league. Are we ready to say that he is the best? I don't think so. I think there's some guys with greater experience that you have to maybe give the edge to, but does he have a capability of sort of getting into that mix and maybe passing some of those guys? You've already started to hear guys like Gary Danielson really praise Jake Bentley and mention them as being, mention him as being maybe the top guy in the SEC, at least the top guy in the SEC East. But, I think you look obviously at Drew Lock this week. You look at Jalen Hurts at Alabama. You look at Nick Fitzgerald at Mississippi State, who was outstanding against South Carolina last year. And, there's a lot of good quarterbacks in this conference. So the guy that we believe is the best in the league may actually sort of shuffle as this year goes on. I mean, in the way society is right now, everybody sort of takes what happened this week and jumps all over it, and this is how it is because this just happened. So sort of in our social media world, I feel like some weeks Jake Bentley may be that guy. Other weeks Jalen Hurts is going to have a big week. Other weeks it may be Nick Fitzgerald. Jacob Eason, who's injured at Georgia right now. There's a lot of candidates, I feel like, that are in that conversation.
Yeah, that's the thing, Wes. And, we talked about this with Chris Lowe of ESPN.com in a recent conversation that we both had with him. And just sort of surveying the landscape, it looks just a lot better across the conference in terms of the quarterback picture, both this season and long term, because some of the guys are young, And, you mentioned some of the names, and you got Shea Patterson and Jalen Hurts and Bentley, Eason, Jake Fromm, who's going to play against Notre Dame at Georgia. Georgia's got a couple young ones that have talent. So, and there's some guys that I didn't mention. Tennessee's got a guy who didn't even start their last game that some people feel like could be good in Jarrett Guarantano. And, I don't know if we'll see him this year or not. We'll have to see. But I think it's hard to say Jake Bentley's going to be the best quarterback or he's the best one right now. Because it sort of depends on what metrics you're using. Are you just using the eye test? Who is he sort of the MVP, et cetera? I think he'll be, at the end of the day, he'll be top 3. I mean, I think that's fair to say, possibly, because I think there's honestly some guys who are really talented. But in terms of the publicity he'll get after this season and the accolades that he'll draw regionally and nationally as to where he is seen, it wouldn't surprise me if somebody does say, hey, he's the best or he's top 3. But I'd probably place him in that upper echelon. It's just hard to say, yes, he's going to be number 1.
I agree with you, Chris. I think the perception of who the best quarterback in the conference is will probably change from week to week. But I think right now, with the fact that Eason for Georgia is out, you could make the argument that Bentley and Locke are the 2 best quarterbacks in the Southeastern Conference, at least right now. So that's another interesting talking point for today, and we can continue on that. We've got other topics to talk about today as well. Let's go back to the Gamecock Central Hotline here. We have a call from Florida. Tyler from Florida calls in on the Gamecock Central Hotline, and he's got a question about the Gamecock defense.
Hey, guys, this is Tyler down here in Florida. Love the podcast. So my question kind of is, how can you kind of reconcile saying that we have a, young team when 60% of our defense next year will be gone? And if you can't get it done with Taylor Stallworth, Sky Moore, Bryson Allen Williams, King, one of the best cornerback coming out of, the 2016 or 15 class, how can you reconcile saying that we have a young team, and if we can't get it done this year with the guys that we got, how much can the Gamecocks fans put in next year when 67% of the defense will be basically gone? Thanks again. Love the podcast. Go Gamecocks.
Interesting call there from Tyler, fellas. The Gamecocks are young, but Tyler makes an interesting point. There are some seniors on this Gamecock defense that will be moving on at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think with Tyler there, his point is sort of how can we call them young if 67% of the defense, and I haven't checked his math, I'm assuming that sounds right, will be gone. And I think what you have here is there's a difference between being young, from basically what classification are you in, and then young as far as how much have you played in the current scheme, how much good experience do you have, or you've played well. And we talked about it before the season. South Carolina has a lot of seniors on this team that needed to play better. I think Taylor Stallworth has always been a pretty good player, probably an underrated player for South Carolina. But Dante Sawyer is a senior who's been a reserve prior to this year. Yorick Jones is a senior who was in that group that they kind of challenged to play better late in their career this year. Jamarcus King is a guy that has only been at South Carolina for one full season, had just started his second season. DJ Smith is a guy that's playing better as a senior. So, I think if you're South Carolina, how do you get better? It goes back to what we've been talking about ever since this staff arrived, Chris, is you have to recruit above the guys on the team right now. You have to recruit better players. And, I think, the defense will probably take a step back early next year, which I don't even know if we can really start. It's hard to project what's going to happen tonight. So to start talking about, let's project what the defense is going to look like a full season, a full winter workout, a full spring, and a full summer, and a recruiting class for now is very, very difficult to do. But so I would put my efforts and energy on enjoying the season as opposed to already worrying about next year. But that said, you do it by recruiting guys, and if you want to sort of have something good to think about, you look at the young guys from this defense who will be back next year. And your freshmen right now that we haven't even really got a great look at yet, Chris, like, your Shirai Greens, your Aaron Sterlings, your Brad Johnsons, your Taven Jackson, who's been injured. All those guys will probably be in a situation to play a major role on next year's defense. So, but again, it's game 2 of this season.
7 o'clock kickoff tonight for the Gamecocks in Missouri. The game's on ESPN2, and this is the Gamecock Central Game Day podcast. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell and Chris Clark. If you have not downloaded the Gamecock Central Radio phone app, you can get it now on the App Store and on Google Play. It's a free app. It allows you to listen to our free podcast from your mobile device or your cell phone. Subscribe to our podcast. Search for Gamecock Central Radio on iTunes, SoundCloud, or other popular services, or just visit radio.GamecockCentral.com. We're going to move back to the Gamecock Central hotline. This is a new feature, new phone line that we've got set up. Give you that number again, 803-497-9058. You call the hotline, leave us a voice message, and we'll play the recording of your voice on a future edition of Gamecock Central Radio. Back to the hotline we go.
Hey, guys, it's Michael from Chapin. I was just wondering, how do you think South Carolina will handle Missouri's RPOs? And a second question, with the starting offensive line group that we've seen so far, what do you think, barring injury going forward, what do you think the outlook is for the season and whether or not this group goes the distance? Thank you.
Thanks for the phone call, Michael. A couple of questions here from Michael from Chapin. How will South Carolina handle Missouri's run-pass options, Wes, and what's the outlook for the Gamecock offensive line the rest of the year?
Yeah, I'll answer those backwards. I think the South Carolina offensive line, to me, was one of the most pleasant surprises if you're South Carolina from the game this past week. I liked what I saw from the bunch. Now, does that mean that all issues are fixed completely? Probably not. Do we probably still see some different guys in there along the way, even without injuries? I think so. I think at some point DJ Park's going to get a shot in there. I think at some point at left tackle, Dennis Daly's going to get a shot. But I think all things considered, positive start. You feel a little bit better about South Carolina's offensive line from just watching one game compared to what we thought about it coming in. RPOs, I think that's a question that every defensive coach in the country is probably asking themselves. How do we stop these? How do we slow these down? And Chris, I think that's something where you always sort of see from a big perspective, from like a grand scheme of things, you always see maybe an offensive innovation, then you see defenses try to catch up. And right now, I think we're still sort of in the defenses catch up stage of RPOs. But again, assignment football, always important. And South Carolina, I don't think we can stress enough how well they have to be able to use their eyes and spot their keys. Muschamp talked a little bit last week about how South Carolina was sort of getting their eyes in the wrong place at times and getting out of lanes defensively. So I think that's going to be key. At the same time, it seems like with those RPOs, there are times when they just got you. It's a good execution. It's a good call. There's not a whole lot you can do defensively sometimes.
Wes, we heard earlier this week, in fact, we got a very good podcast with a look at Missouri football from Gabe DeArmond from PowerMizzou.com. Gabe said that excitement about the Missouri offensive production last week was completely tempered by the fact that the Missouri defense gave up so many yards and so many points. 35 first-half points Missouri gave up to Missouri State last week. So, we spent a lot of time this week here on Gamecock Central Radio talking about how productive the Missouri offense was and what a big day it was for them moving the football and scoring points. But folks in Missouri are completely focused on the fact that their defense was poor last week, and they're very concerned about that coming into South Carolina.
Yeah, and I think that they should be. And again, I think, especially these days, Emerson, don't you feel like we just as fans, just anybody who watches college football, we always kind of take too much from one game? I feel like it's not us in particular, but just everybody puts way too much emphasis on one game. But at the same time, if you're a Missouri fan or Missouri media watching, there were so many things wrong with how Missouri played, from not being able to stop the run, not getting a pass rush, not tackling well, having guys out of their gaps. There's so much to clean up that I think you have to be worried if you're Missouri. And, there were so many opportunities where Missouri State was able to actually at times run the football on 3rd and long and pick up first downs. There was a 3rd and 24 where Missouri State was backed up towards their own goal line, and they had perfect protection, hit a pass down the middle of the field, broken tackle, and then it's an 80-yard touchdown for Missouri State. So there's so much for Missouri to clean up. I think that we'll see some improvement from them, but if I'm a Missouri fan, I am pretty worried about what I saw. And you know what, Emerson, I didn't think coming in, Barry Odom is a defensive-minded coach. I thought this would at least be a somewhat improved Missouri defensive team, but with 60 minutes of football as our guide here, so far that's not been the case.
Yeah, Gabe said that Missouri State had 6 plays in the ball game last weekend that totaled about 300 yards of their total offense. They finished with 492, and one of them was that 89-yard touchdown pass that came on 3rd and 24. So plenty of defensive problems for Missouri, and they're facing what you got to believe is a more talented South Carolina offense this weekend. So it's going to be interesting to see if it's the shootout that everyone is thinking that it's going to be coming into the ball game. So it's time now for our keys to victory, and for Missouri's keys to victory, we'll go back to Gabe DeArmond. He's the publisher of PowerMizzou.com.
Well, I think for Missouri, number one, their offense is going to have to be on point like they were in week 1. I mean, this is a team that's going to have to win some shootouts and going to have to put points on the board. And the key to that offense is getting Demarie Crockett going, so you really have a multifaceted attack. So that's number one. Number two, they've got to win the turnover battle. Whether it's 4-2 or 2-0, whatever, they've got to come out on the plus side of that. And that's a point that Drew Lock really stressed. And number three, I think, is really a key for either team. I think this could be a game where the defense that comes up with 4 stops gets a win. If you can get 2 stops each half, whether it's a turnover, downs, whatever it might be, if you can come up with 2 stops each half, I think you have a chance to win, because I think this is a game that could get into the high 30s, low 40s pretty easy. What Missouri has to hope is it's not the first team to 60 wins based on the way they played last week. But, I mean, the over-under is 74, and I don't know if I don't bet, but if I did, I think both teams could get up in the 40s.
So there you have it, Wes. Keys to victory for Missouri from Gabe DeArmond from PowerMizzou.com. And now we will listen in to Collyn Taylor, staff writer for Gamecock Central. He's got Gamecock keys to victory today on the Gamecock Central Game Day podcast.
Obviously, it's shaping up to be a shootout. Both Missouri and South Carolina have potent offenses. Right now, I think the Gamecocks have to stop the pass. They struggled with that a little bit Saturday against Ryan Finley and NC State. And against Missouri, they're really going to have to make sure Drew Lock doesn't have a whole lot of time in the pocket to throw, because if he does, then he's going to be able to pick apart that defense. I think the pass rush is key, getting Bryson Williams involved in that, and DJ Wanham, and making sure they're, speed up Drew Lock's internal clock and makes him kind of feel like he has to get the ball out quickly. Will Muschamp said earlier in the week that, they throw Missouri throws the long ball better than almost anybody in the SEC, almost anybody in the country. And so if they can get to Drew Lock quickly, then it'll be hard for him to throw that deep ball. And I think that's huge for them. And offensively, I think they have to be able to run the ball. Drew Lock and that Missouri offense that can, scored over 70 points last week can't hurt you if they're on the sidelines. And running the ball and controlling the tempo of the game and controlling the clock is going to be huge. So I think that if Rico Dowdle and A.J. Turner both believe that they're going to run the ball more this week, they can exploit that. I think if they do that, then they'll be able to move the ball effectively, and it'll open up a lot of passing lanes for Jake Bentley. But it should be a good game, high scoring from what all the experts and the media think. So it should be a fun one to watch.
All right, thanks to Gabe and Collyn for bringing us keys to victory, Wes. Final thoughts as we get ready for South Carolina and Missouri. 7 o'clock kickoff tonight on the Deuce.
Yeah, I think, and not to be a cop-out, Emerson, but I think, again, we talked about it going into NC State. It proved to be true then. In a close football game, who makes big special teams plays, or at least doesn't mess up their special teams? Who plays the best inside the 20 in the red zone, and who can not turn the ball over and force turnovers? You look at last year's game, I thought South Carolina's wide receivers very much outplayed Missouri's defensive backs. Several jump balls that South Carolina's receivers were able to go make plays on. On the other side, Drew Lock may be a great quarterback. He is, but he is prone to make the big mistake. He is prone to put the ball in danger. When the ball's in the air, South Carolina's got to play the ball very, very well. They did that some at NC State, other times not so much. So, those are my keys, man. It's the game that, again, is going to be close. It's going to come down to the fourth quarter like Muschamp likes to talk about. If I'm South Carolina, anything they can do to get that defense off the field and keep them from wearing down. One other thing I'm looking for, Emerson, I think we're going to see more players in this game as far as defensively. They're going to go to their depth a little bit more. They're going to have to just trust those guys. They may make mistakes, but I'm talking about your Sherrod Greens at linebacker, your Eldridge Thompsons, your Aaron Sterlings up front, Daniel Fennell at the buck position. Maybe we see Keyshawn Nixon. I think with as much spread as Missouri uses, maybe you get a sixth defensive back on the field at times. Last week, I should say, South Carolina used their nickel some with 5 defensive backs, never went to sort of a dime look. I think you maybe see a dime look to just get more athleticism on the field, maybe get a Keyshawn Nixon out there. But this is a game that is so, so key for South Carolina, Emerson. If they can head into Kentucky 2-0, night game, Williams-Brice Stadium, you got a great atmosphere to sell to prospects, and you're off to a heck of a start. So just a massive, massive game for South Carolina tonight, and it should be a fun one as well.
No question. Missouri feels like this game could be their season. Where they go from here, how they perform tonight against South Carolina could determine their fate for the rest of the season. If they don't beat the Gamecocks, they feel like they're going to have trouble getting to 6 wins this year. So, Wes, real quick before we wrap it up, buy or sell? Will Muschamp said earlier this week that the Gamecocks are going to run the football more against Missouri. Are you buying that, or are you selling it?
I'm going to buy. I think that I think they have to, man. And I, you know what? I watched this Missouri front. I think South Carolina can run the football on those guys. And I thought obviously last week South Carolina looked like a better pass blocking team. From everything I'd picked up heading into this year, the line probably felt a little bit more, better about its ability to be a run blocking unit. So I think we start to see that this week. I watched Missouri State have success against Missouri's front. Now Missouri's going to be challenged. There's always sort of that little bump up in energy, sometimes in execution when a team gets just they're manhood challenged, which I think is probably what happened at Missouri this week. So Missouri's defense is going to come out fired up. It's going to be South Carolina's job to put them right back in their place and make some plays. But I think we see all three backs. Tyson Williams, we didn't really get to see much of him last week. Didn't see a ton of A.J. Turner either. I think if you're South Carolina, it's time to showcase those three backs, run the football, and then obviously you're always going to have Deebo Samuel involved in the game and those receivers as well. Watch out for Shi Smith too. I think this could be the week. And Emerson, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to say this every week until it happens. This could be the week that Shi Smith busts out. Sooner or later, he had a few catches last week. Sooner or later, Shi Smith is going to take over a football game and become a household name.
Outstanding. Something to keep an eye on in tonight's matchup, South Carolina and Missouri. Looking forward to it. Wes, thanks very much for being part of the Game Day podcast again this week.
Yeah, man, looking forward to it. We'll have complete coverage after the game, Emerson, on Gamecock Central and on Gamecock Central Podcast.
Indeed, we will. Thanks to Chris Clark as well for being with us today. And I want to thank our callers who took part in the podcast today on the Gamecock Central hotline. We heard from Royce, Michael from Chapin, Tyler, USC student, and also Tyler from Florida. So get involved with the Gamecock Central podcast. Call us on the hotline. Leave a voicemail. We'll play a recording of your voice on the future episode of Gamecock Central Radio. And that number again is area code 803-497-9058. For all of our callers, for Chris and Wes, I'm Emerson Phillips. Thanks for being with us on the Gamecock Central Game Day podcast.